Welcome to our Friday webinar. I'm Pamela Schultz, and today we're going to be talking about the emergence of electric cars. You can see the image behind me. This is the blue marble, a very famous photo that was taken by the crew of Apollo 17 in 1972. Today is Earth Day 2022, and the theme for this Earth Day is invest in our planet. So I thought it would be interesting to highlight or to focus on a technology that is rapidly changing around the world, and that is electric cars. First, before we get started, I have just a quick story, my own anecdote as to how rapidly electric cars have emerged. Years ago, when my kids were younger, we would drive around town. I live in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and we would have this game that we would play where every time you would see a Volkswagen Bug, you would sort of give a little nudge to the person in the car next to you and say, punch buggy, no punch backs. And that game became a little boring because you'd see those cars all the time. It wasn't that challenging. So we came up with a new game, which was every time we saw an electric car, we would zap the person next to us. And it was kind of a fun game because they were so rare to see at that point. What's happened since then is that electric cars here are commonplace. It is not unusual at all to see an electric car. So that game also is not something we really play because there's no challenge. There's no excitement anymore with seeing them. I will say that I purchased an electric car at Nissan Leaf originally in, actually, I don't remember exactly what year, but probably about 5 years ago, and certainly have never looked back. It was a great car, got a 2015 model, and I really love that car. I highly recommend it. Anyway, today what we're going to do is we're going to look at some data and show you some examples in DataGraph of creating some graphs with this data. And there's really three sources of data that I looked at for this. I searched around quite a bit to find an overall database of electric car usage and didn't find exactly what I was looking for, but I think I still have some interesting data to share with folks. And if anyone out there is aware of other sources of data, then that would be useful as well. So let me go ahead and start by sharing my screen. Here we go. So first source of data that I looked at, Wikipedia. You know, I searched around a little bit, and the fact is this is a page, electric car use by country. I thought was interesting that it actually specifically states this article may be too long to read and navigate comfortably. There's a lot of information on this page, a lot of dedicated Wikipedia editors that are putting information on this page. So I pulled, you may have seen, let me see if I can go ahead and share this. Oh, that's not the one I want to share right away. This is the one I want to share. I pulled data from that page to look at country by country data to see the percentage of new registrations for passenger plug-in vehicles, or actually this says total new car sales. You can see Norway 2021, 86% of new car sales being a plug-in vehicle. Now, these are not necessarily fully, this can be a plug-in hybrid. So this is a split between completely battery powered and plug-in hybrid, but pretty impressive and again, a pretty rapid change in the technology for electric vehicles. So that's one thing that I looked at in terms of getting a sense. And you can see, you know, other countries here having lesser amounts, but again, this is also based on the percentage. So some of the number of cars in some of these countries would be greater. It's just the percentage of the total new car sales. Okay, next source that I looked at, this is the an alternative fuel vehicle inventory that comes from the Alternative Fuels Data Center. There are files that I uploaded to the DataGraph help that have the links to this. For now, let's just kind of look at what this data is. In fact, let me show you one other graph, because what I really did want to focus on was electric vehicle data. And there is a, on this page, again, for US electric vehicle sales, there's one graph here that's kind of interesting. This is from 2011 to 2019, showing specific models of cars, electric cars being sold in the US. And there's a long list of them here. Now, this is a traditional stacked bar graph. And what I think is pretty clear when you look at this is how things really changed rapidly in 2018 with the introduction of the Model 3. This data is no longer tracked, so we don't have this graph continuing beyond 2019. Instead, what we do have on this particular page is a graph, this alternative fuel vehicle inventory. Again, if I pull this one up, this is, it's very traditional, or maybe that's not quite the right word, but it's very common to see a stacked bar graph for data like this. And then you can see the total number of vehicles. This, in particular, this data set is per 1,000 vehicles. I'm not a huge fan of always using the stacked bar graph because it can make it difficult to really see the trends with individual pieces of data. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you not just using the stacked bar graph. Let me show you here. So this is a stacked bar graph that's made in DataGraph. We'll look at this file, but I also am going to present this in an alternative way, where instead of having the x-axis be time, here we have the x-axis grouped by vehicle category. The advantage here is that you can really see for individual categories what the change is over time. And for this data, it doesn't really matter to know exactly what the amount is per each year. We're really looking at the overall trends. You can see, again, if we're focusing in on the electric vehicles, that's this data over here. And there's this massive ramp up that's occurring, particularly in that vehicle type that we don't see in these other types of vehicles. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Okay, let's go to the third data set that I have been looking at. And this is a data set. This is from the European Environment Agency, new registrations of electric vehicles in Europe. This page only has data up to 2020, so it does not include 2021. Again, you can see this is the percentage of cars registered. Here we have Norway at the top here with about 75% in 2020. Here you do have a little bit more information on the type of vehicle, because you see both battery powered and hybrid plug-in vehicles differentiated between the two of them. The other thing that you see here is you also can see not just the percentage, but you can see the total number of vehicles is on this graph at the right-hand side. One thing, I guess, when I look at this, to me, this is sort of difficult to really draw a visual line from one graph to another to be able to really tell, which country is which, and to make that leap from one graph to another graph. So for this also, I have an alternate way of looking at this, where instead of using the using this side-by-side bar graph where you're again, you're seeing one or the other. Here, what I have is a graphic using that data created in DataGraph, where we have the percentage on the right-hand side, and then we have the total number of vehicles on the left-hand side. So in this graphic, you can see much clearer the connection between the two. So we just have the country listed in the center. I refer to this as an upside down pyramid graph. And this is not hard to do within DataGraph. So we will show you that as well. And just from the data point of view, you can see here, for example, pretty clear the connection Germany has the most registered vehicles in this group of countries. Percentage is a little bit lower, but here you have both data kind of connected to each other. Okay, so let's go ahead now and go into DataGraph. So here are the online examples within DataGraph, which again, I just uploaded 2 new files. This is in the Datasets section. Here's the one on alternative fuel vehicle inventory, and then the electric vehicles in Europe. So the first one that I want to show you how I created this in DataGraph to sort of walk through this is the alternative fuel vehicle inventory. So this file is, again, this is data that is from that website that I showed you. And in these files, what we've done is there's a note here for the data set, so you can see where the data came from. And the links are there for you to grab the data. So if you want to see how did we grab this data, well, you can click on that link there. Here's a download link directly on this page. And this is in an Excel spreadsheet. Let me show you my downloads folder here. Here it is. Now what I have is I have my computer set up so that I can open up Excel files directly with DataGraph. It is my default way of opening Excel. If you open this file, here's what you will initially see. Now, one thing that we changed in DataGraph 5.0 is under the View menu, you'll see the alternate screen mode. And I'm going to use that today because I think that makes it a little easier to see this data. So when I go into this mode, this is a mode we created specifically for using small screens, but it's also really nice if you want to just look at your data, you get a nice wide view of it. The graph window, you can optionally show that. And what you see here are 2 groups of data. In fact, if you want to open up the definitions side view here, you can see there's one group. This actually is named whatever the name of the spreadsheet was that I opened. And then the 2 groups below that represent each of the worksheets where this data is housed in the original Excel sheet. Let me go ahead and just close that for a moment. So when you look across this, one of the things that, if you're a DataGraph user that you'll notice pretty clearly is that there are no titles given to any of these. Very common in Excel to have the titles for the columns further down in the rows, and then DataGraph won't necessarily pick them up. Easy to remedy, and you can do this for all this data at once because in both tabs, I can view them at the same time. And I can just right click on that and say, use row for column titles. That populates all of the column titles. I'm going to hold the shift key and select now these 3 rows and hit delete. So now for both of my groups, the data is where I want it. I'm going to add a title here for the vehicle type, and also for the year. Now notice I'm able, oh, I put that actually in the wrong spot, but notice when I double click, if I'm in the data table and I double click on the left side of the header, then it will allow me to edit directly into the header. If I double click on the right side, let's see what happens. That's going to automatically open up the data definitions here. So you have some control over whether or not that happens. Just so you're if that does happen, that's why. Now, the other thing that I would want to do here to clean up this data is I would not want to leave all of these notes in here. You can see this is, again, a very common thing to do within spreadsheets is to have, some note fields, some metadata within the within the worksheet itself, but in DataGraph, we can put that in a note. So I'm going to go ahead and first of all, hide the other worksheet, because I'm going to highlight all of these rows. So I hold the Shift key to select these. If I had that other worksheet showing and I copied this, it would copy that data as well. I just want to copy right here. So I can copy this and then put it into a note field within DataGraph. I probably don't want all of that. Now, what I also did within the file that's online is I put, for example, the link. I tend to like to put these in the note fields for the group of data itself, showing where this data came from, and then you'll have the hyperlink there. So then maybe I wouldn't necessarily, have this be quite so long as that. I think in the actual file that's online, I just have the acronyms there. So now that I've done that, I can go ahead and hit delete. And notice it's going to ask me, what are you deleting? Do you want to delete these rows from from all the columns in your file? I don't want to do that because my other worksheet that is saved in a different group has data in some of those rows. So I'm going to delete just from the current group, and you can see that highlighted here within this preview window. So now if I go back and I show both groups, you can see what I have here. I guess the only other thing I could do is, I don't need this column. I can highlight that and hit the delete key. So what's interesting about the way that this data is provided is that they provide it in, it's the same data. So these are two versions of the same data, where here we have the type as a column where the description is given in a row and the year is across the top. Over here, you see the year, it has its own column, and the description instead is across the column headers. So it's really just data that's been transposed. If you've seen a lot of these videos and you're a DataGraph user for a while, you've definitely seen me take data like this and do what we call flattening the data. I'm not going to do that actually today. I decided for this webinar to actually just use the data in the format that's here, and instead to explore this command right here, which is the bars command. I do love using the pivot command, and I like doing that manipulation, but these data sets are not so big that you have to really necessarily go to the pivot command. We can analyze this or create these graphics with the bars command. So what I want to do first is just show you the basic structure of if I create the graph with the data in this format versus creating this graph with the data in this format. So if I pre-select my column for type and I highlight all the way across to my last column and I click the bars command here to the shortcut that's in my toolbar, then I get a graph like you see here, where I have now everything grouped according to this type that you see. So this is the first step in making the graph that's in that online example. Let's go ahead and do a second graph. And this time we'll highlight the columns with the transposed data with the year down in its own column. Now, one thing I will say when you're doing the bars command, if you want this to, you want the command to use this column as a category along the x-axis, then make sure that you convert it to a text column. Otherwise, it's going to think this is data. So first converting to a text column. Now, again, highlighting. Here we go. Highlight all these columns. And I'll click my bars command. So now I have, again, the first step in making the stacked bar where the x-axis is the the numerical values here for, well, or the years. They're actually, as I said, there is text. So quickly, how can I go from these basic graphs, let's look at our thumbnails, from here to here and go to the more polished ones that are in that online example? Well, what we need to do is go into our commands. So for this one, actually, there's a couple of different things. First of all, I guess the main thing here is that I would want to sort the data. So you can see how right now my categories are not in any order in terms of the way that I want to show them. It's, I think, much more useful to show something that has the trend associated with it. Because the bars command really uses the data as is, in fact, let me go back to look at the data. What we want to do is actually sort this data based on a particular column. So if I want my categories along here to be ordered from the least to the highest number of vehicles in 2020, for example, then all I need to do is sort this table of data. And I can do that by selecting this column and right-clicking on the column header, and I'll say sort, increasing, and I'm going to, again, what do you want to sort? Do you want to sort the whole, everything that's in your data? No, I just want to sort the columns that are in this group. And now that I do, now you can see that the everything is nicely ordered. Now, another thing that we'd need to do here is this by default shows the total. I don't want the total within this, so I can expand my bars command where, and I guess for those of you who maybe haven't used this much before, here's the format of the bars command. It's one of the few commands actually that allows you to select multiple columns like this, to be able to select this wide format of data. So if I wanted to not include the total column, then that's a pretty easy thing to do. I can say I want to mask. So here's my use as mask, where the type of my vehicle is not a match for the word total. Now my graph does not include that that total there. So again, this is kind of just the beginnings of what we would want to do. We can change the colors. We would do that here with the color tiles. I find it helpful to just kind of start by changing them all to the presets, because then I can see which tiles are being used. This allows you to have, I believe it's up to 24 unique colors for different bars. Here you can also, a little trick is to hold the Control key and click and drag the tiles from one to another. Then you have this current range option that would allow me to change them all at the same time, except what I found looked really, I thought sort of nice, is just to highlight the data just for 2020. Okay, let me show you a little bit of how I changed this graph here. And basically, it's really using the X stacked option. So now you can see again, the stacked bar graph. The other thing that we can do here, again, change the colors. I kind of like, for categorical data like this, the spectral color scheme looks sort of nice. And then you could, continue to modify this to get the format that you like. I guess one quick thing is, if you wanted to change the order of these, then this bars command, each one of these items that's listed, each column that's included, is something that I can actually click and drag around. So that's one way to reorder. Now the colors are still going to stay the same for whatever the first and last category are. This isn't a data-driven color scheme like we can do in the pivot command, for example, but it is easy to change this order if you would like to do it in that way. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to the file let's see. So you can see, again, this is, kind of the finished product of doing these manipulations and the graph that you see here. One thing that I thought was kind of fun to do with this is also to show the first and the last point connected. And this is something that I've often seen people doing this technique online, referred to as a slope graph, where one year is taken and another year, not necessarily consecutive, and drawing a line for those slopes. And I don't love that technique when using temporal data, because you don't necessarily know what's happening behind the scenes. So maybe to show you this a little more clearly, that if we hid the bars themselves and just saw this line, you would think that the electric vehicles versus the E85 had very similar trends going on. But by showing all the underlying data, you can see that actually what's happening in these for these particular vehicles are quite different. Anyway, that's just sort of a kind of something that has been a little pet peeve of mine, that I really like showing the bars in the background. So let's go ahead and look a little bit at the other example that I posted online. Now, the other one that I posted is this electric vehicles in Europe. We'll go ahead and open up this file. And in this one, again, I downloaded the data. The link is here if you want to go ahead and download that data. Again, it's in an Excel file, so you can open that up directly into DataGraph and it will bring the data in. I did not do a significant manipulation of the data for this. If you want to see this, again, very handy to go into alternate screen mode and look at just the data. We can hide the graph. Now, what I did do is I had to add in, or what I wanted to do was to show the total for each of these. So the raw data has a country code. It has the total number of cars in terms of battery electric, plug-in hybrid, and then it has the percentage values. So I also did a sum of those using an expression. So that was easy enough to do. I did simplify the column names here if you go to the original data and put them into groups, but I just think that's easier to kind of organize and have navigated. And the other thing that I needed was actually to change from a country code into the name of the country itself. So I also downloaded this table into this file, which shows you the country code and the name of the country. And then that is simply mapped here within this column. And that's really easy to do. I brought in this table, and then here you can see the mapping column. You can set these up manually, but you can also just go to whatever column you want to map, right click on it, you'll see map. And because my code is, the column has the same name in the data as well as in my lookup table, you can see my options for what do you want to map this to. So I could pick any of these columns and then just show the name of the country there. Easy to do. It's very easy to map data like this within DataGraph. Now, if we want to look at the graphs that are in this, show the thumbnails. I show you how to make one of these, where this is a stacked bar graph where I have the name of the country and the amounts. Again, this is using the bars command. The same thing here, a stacked graph with the both the battery and the plug-in hybrid. Now, the trick I used on these is to add in using a points command. I have the percentage shown for the total percent. That's why I had to sum that. So the labeling that's built into the bars command could be used, but I sort of find it's kind of handy sometimes to keep the labels separate. So I use a points command for this, and have the label, again, here's the label shown here in percentage. And what else I want to say about, oh, and then the final one, the combined version here shows you the both commands. Now I've changed the colors on these to be what to me was a little more aesthetically pleasing. But again, linked based on this middle section. Now, the way also that this is done is using a sort of the data. So the original data set was not sorted in the way that you see here, but I sorted it in the data table, and I sorted it actually based on this sum column. So this is a sum of both the battery electric cars and the plug-in electric cars. That's done in an expression. You can, again, if you double click over here on the right-hand side, it will pull up for you that expression so you can see how this is calculated, pretty straightforward. But what's kind of cool here is that you can rely on actually the expression also as a way to sort your data. So if I wanted to change this graph, as you see here, to have it sorted based on the total number of cars, then I could go to this column, which has the sum of the total number. I can right click on this. I can sort let me make sure I have just to double check that I'm going to do this correctly. Let's hide my country codes group, even though that probably wouldn't really be affected by my sorting, but just to make sure I'm sorting just the data within this table. And we will go ahead and sort my displayed columns. And there you go. So now you can see how the resorting of the data in the table is reflected within my graph here. And if I want to sort it back in terms of the percentage, I can go ahead and do that as well. Now, in the pivot command, which again, we're not really covering that in this webinar, there's dynamic sorting within the command itself. But again, not everyone necessarily is comfortable with the pivot command. It is a little bit more of an abstraction. I do recommend very much getting used to using it because it has so much functionality. But for data sets this size, it's fine to not always have to go to pivoting and to use the bars command. So with that, we'll go ahead and take questions. And I see there's one question on the chat. Can you remind us how to change the left x-axis in this graph or the y-axis in the previous graph to logarithmic rather than linear? And let me go ahead and see which one that would make the most sense on. It's actually pretty easy to change things to a logarithmic scale. I think with this graphic, it might look a little bit, strange to change that. But if I go to, here, if we go to this one, for example, and I wanted to change this x-axis to logarithmic, then that setting is up here within the axis settings. And you see this option here for Y type, which is currently set to linear. If I set that to logarithmic, it's going to change that. Now I have here a text overlay. Now, one of the things that, not everything can be represented in a logarithmic scale if it starts with a 0. First of all, that's most likely why some of these are not really showing up. Because renewable diesel didn't have any data prior to this. So what I might want to do here is just click and drag to highlight this particular data. But bars are a little tricky in a logarithmic scale. So, another thing to do would be to actually do this more using a line plot. That would probably make a lot more sense to show it that way. And the command, which we haven't really been going over or didn't go over in this webinar, but there's one other command in DataGraph that can handle data in what we would call this wide format. And that is the plots command. So you could also look at this data with the plots command. In fact, if you wanted to see this, probably this table here would be the best one to do that with. So I can highlight this data set. We can add a new graph and draw this with the plots. See, now I'm running into the situation where for the plots command, year needs to be a numeric value. It needs to have a numeric value associated with it. So I could go ahead and just one quick way to deal with this is just to make a quick copy or clone of this. I can hold the Option key, make a copy, convert this one to a number, use that one as my x-axis in the plot command. And now, again, I probably would want to get some better color suggestions for these, possibly make this a little bit wider. And if I then, again, put this on a logarithmic scale, I can do that using the axis settings. Pretty sure that option is also just available here by, if I control click or right click on the axis itself, then you can get this shortcut to that option. So you can see this on a logarithmic scale. I'll go ahead and bring this back to linear. And notice again also how, it's pretty easy to, if I decide I don't want to include these categories that are not as significant, I could go ahead and just click and drag is one way to do a quick filter of the data rather than having to necessarily set up a mask on these. That's one option. And just for zooming in, I can go ahead and look at this as well. Now, of course, I'm cutting off the top of my E85, but depending on what you're doing, again, this does really show you very clearly how rapid this increase is in the plug-in electric vehicles here on a question on for how the total volume on the x-axis runs to left. Let me go ahead and explain that a little bit better. So here is the kind of finished figure that you see here. And you can see also within this file, you have both the both individual graphs set up with both going from the left to the right. But here I have this reversed. Well, how did I do that? It's actually pretty straightforward. If I go to this, here's this bar graph. Now you don't actually change it on the bars command itself. This is a change within the axis settings. So let me go ahead and show this here in this view. So in the axis settings, you have this option of reversing the order of things. So you can see this is the main axis. This actually uses a split axis approach in order to create the graph that you see here. So the one that's going to the right is the third axis. In the middle is where I actually am placing these labels. And on the left-hand axis, which when I've split things in the X direction, the left axis is always going to be the main axis. And what I've done here is I've said to reverse that. So if I bring this back to say linear, now you can see how now it's going in the other direction. Now there's other formatting I did here to get this to look right. Primarily, I hid the default y-axis. So I've got that hidden here. And I also have the labels set up so that they're going in the right direction. So if I want to reverse this, I can. And setting up these axes like this is, it's pretty straightforward. If you just started with, if you wanted to see this from a brand new perspective with a new graph, and I split the X 2 times, that gives me 3 different sections within my graph that I can work on. If you change the box style to axis box, it can make it a little bit easier to see the sections you're working with while you're building this. But the middle section is the one that we want to be much smaller. And you can see there's this little graphic here that gives you an indication, helps you to find, which control is for which axis. So this is highlighting the middle one here in this little indicator icon. I can make that narrower. And then each of these commands, what I basically did was start by, again, creating the individual graphs. And then you don't have to recreate them. Once you've done this, you can go ahead and take this and drag it and bring these commands over to this one here. But again, with some additional formatting. So I'm going to reverse my X. My labels, I originally set them up to be to the right of the data. Here, for this one, I'd want it to be to the left of the data, and I'd need to change my offset to go slightly in the negative direction. I'm not drawing the default y-axis here. Again, I put those labels in the middle, but then the same thing here. I don't need to recreate these. I can go ahead and reuse these commands, drag them over to my composite, and then I would select that these are going over here on the right-hand side. And then this last, center piece that I put in, this is, again, using another points command. And whenever you're going through a file like this that has, multiple elements, then I suggest using the hide to figure out, okay, what command is drawing which element on this particular graph. So then you can look at this and see, how is this created? You can look at the suppliers list to figure out what columns are being used. And this is, again, using the country code in terms of actually sort of a neat trick that's done here is the country code. Again, if I right click to the right, I can get my definitions list. This is, oh, not in this table. I'm in the wrong one here. I would want the actual data. Here we go. So within the data, this country code has a map to a value. If you've never done this before, this is a handy thing to know, because what I wanted to do here is put again, a label at each one of these locations, and all of these bars are drawn at a row value. That's how this how the bars command again works. It's going to depend on where things are within the row. So if I take this column where I have the country codes and I want to plot it, basically, then I can do that by making sure, again, it's mapped to a value. So I said the value for this text column is mapped to a row. And now that I've done that, I can have these points where actually the X is always going to be the same. And this column for the code, that is a text column, which usually, again, for a points command usually does not work, but I can, because I've mapped it to a value, I can use this column to locate a point for each one of these bars. And then I change this to have a label that is the country name, and then set this to be centered. I can make this centered exactly, and then just don't show a marker. And with a little bit more formatting, you can get the graph that you see here. I guess one handy trick that I will show you that I also used for this is to, when formatting the x-axis, if you look at the data for example, from the Clean Cities data, they had everything in, 1,000 of vehicles. That's kind of handy to not have such big numbers to make these a little bit more tractable for our brains to kind of get around. And in the formatting for the, in here within the axis settings, you have the Y tick marks, which, are by default, these are set to automatic, but I can change these. Actually, sorry, I'm on the X tick marks. I can change these to engineering. And under the engineering setting, I have this option of showing a symbol to indicate whether it's thousands or millions or so forth. And that's really a handy way to format these. In fact, if you change it to uniform with a stride where the increment is 1, then you actually are showing more increments on the x-axis. And again, it's automatically doing this where it's adding that suffix to the end of the number to indicate that these are in thousands. And I actually did the same thing here within this label to make these numbers much more tractable. If you go into the command for this, and I can click right on that number to bring me to the label command for this, or I should be able to do that. Maybe it does not want me to do that. Okay, well, I'll check then here. Nope, not that one. Not this one. Here, it's this one. So if I open this up, you again, and you see the format, I changed the label format from being the entered value, which again would be pretty long numbers, to using this engineering format, which I think looks pretty nice. Yeah, a question on having an example where I'm going step by step through this. I think there are some other, if you're interested, if the question is related specifically to the pyramid style of a graph, then I'd have to check the videos to see if there's another one that goes through it a little bit more. Hopefully what I just did just now is a little bit helpful, but there is also this population pyramid example, which if you go to that, this is using a very similar approach where, again, it's a different type of an example, different type of data, but it has this, center section where there's a label. You have these 2 bar graphs on either side. And this file is kind of fun because it also has, the data is also animated. And these are population projections going way out into the future, which is why they go all the way to 2100. We don't have another Friday webinar scheduled right now. We will be thinking about what we're going to do next. We might take a couple of weeks off, but we, again, started thinking about that at this point. So any ideas, you can always shoot us an email if there's something you think would be a good topic. All right. Well, and happy Earth Day.